So welcome everyone. I'm going to let my panel introduce themselves in a minute. I'm Geoff Baldwin from the Department of Life Sciences, which is actually located on the South Kensington campus. I'm a professor of synthetic and molecular biology and co-director of the Imperial College Centre for Synthetic Biology. So today I think is a really fantastic day. You're going to be hearing from academics like myself, but also people from industry, investors, and very important people like Stephen that we just heard from, who are really invested in supporting the ecosystem that supports innovation and new companies and new technologies. So before we get started, I just wanted to actually get a bit of audience engagement going here, actually. So I want to find out who's in the audience with us today. So I'm actually just going to stand up for a moment so I get a better view. So could you put your hand up if you're from Imperial? Excellent, good number, but not overwhelming, not everyone. If you're from industry? Okay, similar number, thanks. And if you are a funder or supporting the ecosystem, have money to give away, right? Great, you're going to be very popular at coffee time. Excellent. So the takeaway that we're hoping we get from this session today is that really that we kind of see that it's only through collaboration between different organizations and different people that we really create the kind of thriving innovation ecosystem that we are seeking to create and support here. Okay, so now I'm going to turn to my panel, and I'm going to first of all ask you to introduce yourselves, but also then, you know, this session is about resilience in the UK life science ecosystem, and I'd like you to say, what does resilience mean to you and your organisation, you know, and who contributes to resilience within the UK life sciences. So I'm going to, first of all, start off with Steve Bates.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for having me. My name's Steve Bates. I'm the Chief Exec of the UK BioIndustry Association. That's the trade association of over 600 companies, everybody from the really big global players you'll have heard of, like AstraZeneca, through the mid-sized companies like Immunocore, that employ and develop, use venture capital and money from NASDAQ to develop their science, through to small and medium-sized enterprises of one or two people who maybe are taking benches at some of the places that are around here to develop their science. Alongside that, we've got in membership all of the other organisations that develop that, so some of the funders, some of the venture capitalists. We've got good relationships with government agencies like Innovate UK and the research councils, the patent attorneys, everybody that you need to, investor relations people, PR people, everything you need to get a life science company going comes to our community. That community is UK-wide, but these are companies that are growing for the globe. So that's the BIA. I've had the privilege of being the chief exec of it for 10 years, and I've seen it grow from around 200 companies to over 600 companies, and that's not everybody in the UK, so there's even more out there. So that's a little bit about us. I had the privilege of serving on the vaccine task force with Kate Bingham, so I suppose I'm of the view that resilience comes from overcoming a big problem, and I was there in the room, or on the Zoom at least, we weren't in any rooms really in the vaccine task force, to see how we could bring together that amazing community to tackle a global pandemic. So I know that it can be done, and it starts in a very hairy way. You think, what can we do? And then you get people together, and the great thing is, as people come together, you realise that there is talent and willingness to engage, and that goes to then become what we essentially did was partner the UK ecosystem with global players to develop both vaccines, diagnostics, and a delivery system to get them to people over a very fast few months. So I know we can be resilient, and I suppose in the context of this year, what people would say about the life science sector is that perhaps it hasn't had the boom year of funding that we'd had a couple of years ago. Pandemic and COVID is a bit out of fashion these days, talking about it. We're all on to newer challenges in the world. But I think that I would say that we do a report each year on the financing of the sector. You can't do very much without money. You need money, great science and great people. We've got all three, I think, in our ecosystem. But on the money indicator, we published a report a couple of weeks ago, and that showed that the UK retains its position as the leader in terms of the destination for investment to life science companies in Europe. And interestingly, although investment in tech went down by about 40%, investment in life sciences was broadly stable. And that's because there's fantastic stuff coming out of early stage science that you see primarily in the ecosystem we've got here. So I think that's testament to the work that you guys are doing. I'm sorry that's probably a bit long, but I think we can be resilient because of the pandemic, and you can see it in the continuation of funding into the UK that's not seen in other parts of the world.
Thank you. And maybe now we can turn to Emilie.
Oh, thank you, Geoff. It's probably worth reiterating that the UK life sciences industry is one of the strongest and most productive in the world. And I think a big part of that is the growing number of small life sciences companies that are here, and they're particularly important for the resilience of the industry because they are able to take up a lot of the risk. They're able to fail fast. They're able to pivot. They're able to iterate. And I think what's special about the UK is the world-class innovation and research ecosystems in the country, made up of the universities, the science parks, the research institutions, and all of these. This is a fantastic example of that. Are moving, not working not only on research and innovation, but also on translation, commercialization, and incubation of these small companies. And in these environments, these small companies are able to do all those things, fail fast, iterate, pivot, do all those things in a safe space. So I think it's really important. And then another part of that, as Steve mentioned, was the investment side of things. So EIS has been a fantastic incentive to invest in early stage companies. And I'm an investment manager at Parkwalk Advisors. We are the biggest EIS fund in the UK. We have consistently raised £50 million every year for the last 13 years and invested it in university spin-outs. So we really believe in the importance of this. This has made us the most active investor in university spin-outs in the UK.
Thank you. And Leigh.
Hi, thanks for inviting me. Leigh Brody, I'm an investment manager at Albion VC. So I'll introduce the fund a bit quickly. So Albion, based in the UK, it's about $1 billion under management. There's a number of different funds that Albion manages. One is a venture capital trust arm, which invests in early stage companies in the UK. The other is the UCL Technology Fund, which I sit on both. And what that means is that we invest within the UCL University, investing in really, really early stage life science ideas and spin companies out of that. So I work on both of those funds. A biochemist by background. I actually spun out a company from my PhD down the street here about 12 years ago, not to date myself. And since then really got the bug for starting companies and looking at academic ideas and thinking, how can we translate this into a company, into a product? And got the bug for it then. And so that's what I've been doing for the last kind of 10 years from the operational role. I think on the resilience point, you don't go into science because it's easy, right? You have to be a resilient person by nature. So I think by default, everyone sitting in this room and who are in this ecosystem are just extremely resilient population across the board. And I think couple that with, what it takes to actually get some of your ideas either into publications or companies, right? You're constantly thinking about, not being scooped. What's the right way to go forward? How am I going to fund it? Who's going to do it in my group or my company? And I think that multifaceted, way of life, I guess, is just an extremely resilient position. And being in this ecosystem that supports you so well from all the different perspectives, I think creates that platform to kind of allow companies to develop where they are today. So, I think it's everything combined.
Thank you.
Quick answer.
Duleek.
I'm Duleek, CEO of Pear Bio. So Pear Bio is a post-series A computational biology company that's developing patient-centered precision medicine tools and therapeutics. So basically, we work with cancer patients to take their tumor sample, test approved treatment options, and predict response. That's a decision support tool, and we then find patients who don't have response to approved drugs to see what drives non-response so that we can find new targets and create new drugs for the patient populations with the highest unmet needs. We've raised over 15 million pounds in venture capital, growing quite a bit, doing a few clinical studies in precision medicine while our drug discovery programs are in the preclinical stages. And in terms of resilience, I think being at the stage where we are aware of the fundraising environment having kind of peaked in 2021, and it's been 2 years where it's not been easy to raise money for a biotech company. And unlike other industries like tech or consumer products where it's relatively quick to launch something and then grow revenue, biotech companies do need to consume a lot of capital to generate data, and data is really the output of capital in for a lot of the lifetime of a biotech company. So I think to be resilient in this environment, it means that, one, you have to survive, but without stagnating. So that means still getting quality data out there, because if and when the market starts to recover, that means you need to be one of the highest performing companies to attract the capital that you'll definitely need to create a successful product. It looks like 2022, 2023, they were off the peak of 2021, but there's also some positive signs in 2024 that it might be recovering, more M&A. If the US lowers their interest rates, that might be something, but it's also too early to speculate on these things. 2024, I think, has started well, but every company has to be resilient to ride through the possible roller coaster of this year. Yeah.
Great, thank you. And Stephen, you obviously introduced yourself earlier, but I don't know if you have just anything quick to add to this framing.
Yeah, well, look, it's great being on such a inspirational panel. For me, as a leader of a municipality, resilience has a broad scope. So everything from when we have a terrorist attack, how resilient is the community in coming back from that and responding as a cohesive and undivided community, to what happens during a pandemic, to what is the long-term resilience of our children and our future citizenry in responding to a very quickly changing world. So it's a very broad scope. There's a common thread that runs through all of those different things, which is if you create a sense of cooperation and you create a sense of people being open and willing to understand others, then you're more resilient. My biggest experience, we were the first council in Britain to go to an emergency footing when the pandemic happened. And that's exactly what we did. We're very lucky to have an amazing Director of Public Health in Dr. Nikki Lang. But she pioneered, I think, the first test and trace system before anyone else in the country did. We were telling people to wear masks in May, where the government didn't do it till September. We closed our care homes, got into a lot of trouble with the government for closing our care homes. But we learned from Italy that in Lombardy, everyone had died because they put an awful lot of asymptomatic people into care homes, and instead we booked the Novotel and put people in there. So it was that resilience for us as an organisation to not listen. We decided not to listen to central government and to listen to the World Health Organization and to talk to our colleagues in here, Imperial, as much as anywhere else. But because we were getting really rich information, honest information, we thought we were able to take a series of actions very early on, which I do think saved lives. But it was that sense of being able to quickly respond and to act on behalf of the community that I think is the ultimate resilience, no matter what you're responding to. And that has short-term, like pandemic issues, long-term, what are our children going to do in 20 years' time to be fully competitive in an ever more competitive world?
It's probably also worth mentioning in regard to community and the children of this community that the Imperial College and the White City campus does a lot of engagement activities, of schools going into the hack space and these types of things to really try and inspire.
Yeah, I think that's there's a lot of talk at the moment, how do you create innovation districts? But I think actually what you want is an entrepreneurial municipality, because at the end of the day, only democratically elected organisations can have that reach into communities, like into the poorest primary schools, for example. Yeah. And if we're not trying to change the life chances of kids born into the toughest circumstances, then what are we in this for? So that's ultimately resilience, is how do you help everyone be resilient, not just, you know, a privileged people who've been lucky enough to be born into a resilient household.
Thank you. So just to say, we are going to get to audience questions in this session. So while you're sitting there, please do think about some good questions for our panel here today. But we've also got a couple of other sort of questions that I wanted to ask to the panel to explore this theme a bit more fully. So, you know, the next question is to think about what is the UK life science sector actually doing to tackle challenges around resilience. So thinking about what are the challenges of resilience and exploring that from the concepts of collaboration, the gaps, and government input into that. So if we start with collaboration, and you know, where are we seeking collaboration? So maybe Duleek, if we can start with you on that theme.
Well, I think, biotech, there's always a need for collaboration, whether it's with academia, other small biotechs, or big pharma. And definitely that's never changed. Early stage biotechs are still looking to partner with big pharma to get their drugs through. The big pharma still need biotechs to produce new IP. Academia is still churning out more research. So I think, you know, the collaboration's always been necessary for this industry, and that's never stopped. And yeah, one thing that the UK, I think, has done well is have all that talent there, the academic talent, the industry talent to hire, especially the scientific talent, right? So I think that's always been a strong suit, right? And that hasn't really changed. In terms of gaps, I think that while the early stage funding has gotten better and better in the UK for life sciences, so seed stage, Series A, there's still a gap with growth equity, so Series B, Series C, basically up to IPO. And I think that's the next gap that needs to be addressed in the ecosystem.
Thank you. So there may be, coming from the other perspective of the investor perspective, Leigh, if you want to.
Yeah, I completely echo all of these points. You know, I think the way we think about investments, because we're going so early, you know, for us, we're like, okay, here's an interesting either target or platform or technology that an academic is, you know, developing in their group. How are we going to spin this out to a company? You know, and part of that collaboration is saying, okay, you know, if we're going to fund it, you know, who's going to do the right work? You know, do we have to bring in partnerships with either a CRO or a small company to run some of the work? You know, looking forward, is this going to be, you know, a spin-out opportunity? Is this potential acquisition? You know, do we reach out to pharma companies now and kind of get some people brought in a little earlier to help us develop it? And who's going to continue on investing? You know, well, we've done 2 venture builds out of our fund, you know, in the last couple of years. We do the early seed money. We put help with the management team. But, you know, again, completely agree. You know, now we're calling different funds, like our friends on the couch here, of saying, okay, who wants to come in and also, you know, collaborate with us, grow this company, put money in? Because, you know, there's a number of out-and-out seed funds or kind of Series A funds, but, you know, there's definitely a hole for kind of growth funds. And I think we'll see that in the next kind of year or so, because we know that money's, you know, there's a lot of focus on that point.
And Emilie?
Yeah, I think a couple of things. I think there has been a move, you know, towards not just collaboration but also outsourcing, and this is down to the fact that has been mentioned earlier, that things have just become so fast-paced. You know, it used to take maybe years to reach, you know, one candidate, and now, you know, it takes months, and some may say weeks, you know, to get 10 candidates. And then on the medtech side, you know, digital medtech has now become real world, real time. Everything is just faster, and pharma are now sort of acquiring more rather than developing in house. The expertise has also been outsourced. You know, there's been a proliferation of CROs and CDMOs, and they are aware that in order to survive, they have to remain always cutting edge. So everything has just become so fast-paced, and everybody has to be so expert in what they're doing that it's just forced the different players in the industry to sort of work together rather than do their own thing. And on the investment side, so I think there's still room for more funding at the early stage. So we have pre-seed funds with certain universities, one of which is Imperial, but also Oxford and Cambridge. We have a seed fund, which is our main opportunities fund, which is the Evergreen Fund. But we are an EIS fund, and so we are capped at 20 million, and that's not enough. That's not enough funding to get a candidate to clinic, basically. So there is still a need for further funding. Of course, in the UK. And some on this panel are probably better suited to talk about this. We are looking at perhaps getting some government and pension money funneled through for growth stage funding. But it's probably also important to mention the importance of re-establishing and maintaining a relationship with the EU. A great effort has been made to re-enter the UK into Horizon 2020, which is fantastic for research and development. But there's 95 billion of funding there, which is not just for R&D, but also for infrastructure in Cornwall and in the Midlands, for example. And 10 billion of that just focus on SMEs. So I think it's quite important to maintain all the potential funding outlets that are out there.
Steve, and collaboration.
Yeah, I think if we're going to be resilient, one of the things we've got to be able to do is we've got to be able to accept and embrace things going wrong and failure. And collaboration is a core way of being able to get back up again and get going again. Bounce back ability is a really, really important part of being resilient. I started by talking about the vaccine task force. I shouldn't have done that. I should have started by talking about the colossal failures that was test, track and trace, not in Hammersmith, but nationally. And I was involved in that. And I was involved in that when Dominic Cummings in number 10 phoned us up and said, can you help move the Illumina kit out of small companies so that we can set up a centralised genomics testing regime, which is how we're going to do test, track and trace. And I said, yes, I'll help you. And I should have said, that's a bonkers idea, that ain't going to work. But I was part of that initial failure. Now, I learned a lot from that initial failure, that when the vaccine task force came round, we were able to say to Kate Bingham, actually, we should do it differently. We need to tell ministers to do it like this. So part of resilience is being able to fail. And what we've actually built in the UK over a period of time are some structures within which you can take risk. If you're going to go and race a racing car around a track, you want it on a track, you want stewards, you're going to take risk within a series of parameters. And actually, there's quite a lot of de-risking stuff that's going on. The fact that there's other people around who are on the journey, what was it like for you, is a big de-risking factor. The fact that there's money that will be put at risk is a de-risking factor. The fact that you can go back into academia now if you've been in a company, which was much harder 10 years ago. The fact that there's another company around the corner. If this one doesn't work out, you'll have learned something in these 2 years, you can go and do it again, is all really part of the de-risking. Now, that is a collaborative effort to help people de-risk. There's always experts out there. There's other people around who can help. The great thing I find, I don't know if you find this, is that people are so generous with their time. People are always keen to help. The culture is really, really amazing with, everyone wants everybody else's business to succeed. And I think that is the collaborative environment that I find in lots of the communities that are growing up around here. And of course, the thing is, the nation needs growth. The UK is spending a ton of money on very bright people to do fantastic science. And the nation wants its reward for that. And the reward it wants is some businesses to grow and some money to be made so that we can pay for the NHS and social care and all the stuff, transport, houses, all the rest of it that we need. So it's sort of a bit on you guys to help with that. And that might mean that you have to make a lot of money. And that is really what we need people to do with some of this sciencey stuff. And there's no clear way in which that is clear to you today, because you're probably working on something and maybe you don't even know how to measure what it is that you're doing, but you're making the tool that is the thing that can measure it, and somebody will probably want to buy that in about 5 years' time when you've worked it out, and that will be worth a lot of stuff. Not just an academic paper. Academic paper's fine. It's great to do it, but how can we use that to change the world? And a good vehicle to do that is through companies getting some money from these guys, moving it forward fast, and if it goes wrong, it goes wrong. Go and do another one. There'll be another bit of, you'll have learned a whole load of new skills that have got nothing to do with the stuff that you're learning in this. You'll have met some interesting, fabulous people, and it will have been a really exciting adventure.
Thank you. Stephen, I can see you eager to say something.
Well, I would say, Emilie, I think, has hit the nail on the head. If you look at Western Europe, it's the size of Brazil. And if you look at the innovation districts across Western Europe, then there are less than there are in the People's Republic of China. So the urge to collaborate isn't just irrational. It's totally reasonable that we should collaborate with every innovation district, every centre of scientific excellence in order to build up our joint economies. And that's why, for example, we twinned with Barcelona's area at 22 at, which is about 20 years ahead of us. I spoke at their 20th anniversary, which is about 2 years ago. We're just about to twin with some other innovation districts around Europe and Australasia. And at the heart of it, I think liberal democracies should be working together to capture the latest in science. So collaboration is everything, whether it happens at international level. I'm always struck when I sometimes meet people who are working in this faculty, and they'll say something to me like, we worked in Kensington for a long time, 106 years, not the people I'm talking to, obviously, because they're much younger. But we worked in Kensington for 106 years, and we never really had much to do with any of the other parts of that original ecosystem of the science museums, the history museum and stuff. But we come here, and there's collaboration across the board. We're collaborating with schools, we're collaborating with businesses, we're collaborating with the council, we don't understand how that happened. Well, we designed it like that. You know, when we set out doing it, Alice and I, we designed it to be a collaborative space. So the essence isn't just market competitiveness, which I'm all in favour of. The essence is the more people collaborate, the more people share, the more we will produce the types of amazing things that are being produced right now. And it's incumbent on us to make sure we're ahead of the game in doing that and working with others who share our values in making sure we do it first and better. And that's what's so wonderful about this particular campus.
Thank you. So then I think probably a really important question is where do you see gaps, right, in terms of our ability to have a resilient ecosystem? So I don't know who fancies taking that one first. Anyone? Great, Duleek.
So, I mean, I already mentioned kind of the growth stage capital, but I think the other gap in life sciences is around some of the commercialization aspects. So, especially if you're in the healthcare branch of life sciences, so devices, diagnostics, therapeutics, you will have to create a product that goes out to multiple markets. So you can build it locally, the talent is there locally, but to make something commercially viable, you will be selling it to Europe and the US, right? And one of the gaps here still is having that global commercialization mindset and also being able to bring in that global commercial talent, right? So for example, especially in therapeutics, the majority of new drugs that are approved are first approved by the FDA. I think it's around 80-something%, right? Which means that inevitably you'd be going against the odds not going to the FDA to get an approval, right? Which also means that you will have to have a US commercial team, you will have to understand that market. And I think if you constrain yourself locally to the commercialization aspects, you're limiting yourself for that. And so the gap here is that we need to have basically connections between ecosystems. For example, if you're building the science here, it's a very great place to build the science. You also need to have, let's say, US commercialization contacts to be able to sell there, right? So yeah, you know, the local stuff I think is all very good. For example, you can't build lab spaces unless a lot of companies want to move in because it doesn't make sense to. And you can only get early stage science going if there are those local connections, the scientists, the facilities, all that stuff. You build that locally, you're tied to something physical in the life sciences for the most part. But commercially, you're not really tied to a single geography. And the big markets, the UK, major European economies, France, Germany, the US being the single biggest market. For example, in cancer, about 30 to 33% of new revenue for novel medical products in oncology comes from just the US market. So the US is 5% of the global population, 30% of the actual revenue, right? And you can't really ignore China or Japan. Those are two of the other big markets. So you have to really plan around getting to all those markets eventually.
So I don't really like the question about the gaps. I mean, it's very London to say, mind the gap, isn't it? I don't think if we were in California, people would be talking to us about gaps. I see it as we're growing a garden, and when you're growing a garden, some things work and some things don't work as well, and the climate's different, and this one you put in and you want to move it. But there are some sturdy plants that have grown, and there's some things that we should have planted 10 years ago that would make it look better, and there's bits that we didn't get right. Now, there are bits that are growing well, this innovation ecosystem being a great example, the long-term commitment to science and innovation funding that we've seen in the UK for a generation is working well. If we'd have been convinced the City of London of the opportunity in this space 10 years ago, rather than trying to get the pensions money in to be those late-stage investors 10 years ago rather than a year ago. I don't think you say it's a gap. I see that as a gap that's being filled because I can see the pension money coming. I can see global players putting their management teams, their investment management teams into the UK ecosystem. I think that is, if that was a gap, that plant is growing, perhaps not at the size and scale.
I guess really the question we're asking here is where should we be putting our effort, right?
Yeah.
For maximum return.
And I suppose I think there's we have an immature City of London who have missed the bus several times on fantastic opportunities that could have grown to scale from here, and that's annoying to me. But I'm not sure that. So we are putting some effort there, and some other people, very different walks of life, are putting effort there. I think that the aim here is just to realise where we are in terms of the fantastic opportunity that there is in the UK, and go for it. I mean, I think there's nowhere in the world that's got the combination of the investment in genomics and the data that's coming out from a universal healthcare system, with the fundamental science base and understanding of what's going on inside cells and molecules. You put those two together, there's not a hotter ecosystem that can do that. With a global city like London that brings in all of the different skills, talents, and communities that do that. I mean, I think that is where the opportunity lies. There's always going to be gaps and things that aren't perfect. Things aren't perfect in Boston. Things aren't perfect in California. Things aren't perfect in China. They don't talk about that. They just say, right, let's get on and go. And that's where we should be.
Thanks. And then from the investor perspective, Emilie, where should we be putting the effort?
Yeah, we've talked about the various funding gaps, so I probably won't go over that again. I think one thing which can always be further developed, and I think the UK does that really well, and that's the technology transfer, that's the commercialization of the science from universities, but it's a really hard thing to do. So I think that can still do with improvement, and it's happening. Technology transfer offices are growing across the UK in different universities. They're also collaborating and pooling resources over some universities. There's funding going with it. Northern Gridstone's one currently fundraising in the Midlands, and in the Southeast is obviously in a quite luxurious position when it comes to that. So. As you said, I think it's not a gap. It's something which is already being done and already growing, but it's just so hard. So I think it still needs a lot of time and a lot of work.
Leigh.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything the panel said. I think one point to say is that so I spun out a company on my PhD. That was 10 years ago. And you want to talk about resilience, my goodness, every day, beating my head against the wall. And my technology, 10, 11 years ago, was a platform of lipid-based nanoparticles for mRNA delivery. And nobody liked it. They were like, this is the worst idea I've ever seen. It's terrible. Nope. And they were like, you can't make these at scale. I'm like, yeah, but that's an engineering problem. You can throw money at it. You can fix it. But the biology is super interesting. This is great. didn't go anywhere. I was too early. This was like, Moderna hadn't even opened their doors yet. And while I didn't get my timing right, I learned that there is some amazing research going on that just needs to be pulled out, and with the right team and emphasis and plan and money around it, you can have a great success. So, I took that lesson. Hard story. I still have to work. I don't own an island somewhere and, dialing in from the whatever tropical space. But I think it really opened my eyes to a space to say, okay, the UK has some incredible potential. You just need to kind of mine it in the right way. And so, I've been doing that for the last 10 years. And I think to that point, that's where the opportunity lies, is that there's some incredible work here. And, with the collaboration of the Tech Transfer Office, funding, government, everything, having that conversation early and saying, okay, you have an amazing idea. It's an academic idea. How does that translate to a product? They're very different questions, very different journeys, and very different learnings. Right? So I think that is something that constantly needs to be reinforced and started earlier. And if I can do a shameless plug, I'm actually launching something later this year, which is going to be a lab to launch for academic ideas to spin companies out. So just my name's up there if anyone's interested. And to do just that, to kind of keep putting emphasis around that discussion, because I think that is one gap that will always remains. It will just always be there. There's never enough technology. We still have diseases that are not cured. Therefore, we all still have a job to do.
You mentioned government there along the way, and that is just to kind of plug into that a bit more. Where do you think what should or shouldn't the government be doing in this space?
I don't know if the only American on the panel should be answering that, but I think government plays an incredible role, and their support, for this space has been fantastic through funding, awareness, putting the money to build these kind of buildings together. I know in collaboration with the universities and such, but I think really taking the time to understand what are the problems that investors, companies, scientists are facing, and how can we fix that? And I think that, the government has done a good job, plenty of space to go, but, putting money behind all the funding bodies, the grant bodies, and such. I think you can't do it without that piece.
Steve, there may be a comment as well.
I spend a lot of time engaging, particularly with the UK government, but I think it's important that Americans answer this question, because people think that American governments don't support their industries. They do. They've had a massive industrial strategy, and one of the reasons why they've got a biotech ecosystem in the States is because of really, really strong government support from both Massachusetts, California, and the feds. Yeah. Does anybody know why Kendall Square is there? So Kendall Square is the big biotech square in Boston, Massachusetts, if you'll indulge me for a history story. So Kennedy was the president, and in those days, if you were the president, you could decide where large federal programs would go. So he zoned the area in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and he was obviously announcing the space race at the time, and they were going to build the engines for NASA there, and all of his local people were going to get who voted for him were going to get jobs there. He got shot. And Johnson moved the program from what was zoned to be going to Kendall Square to Texas, where they built the engines for Saturn rockets. And it was a desolate wasteland for 10 years, zoned for industry, nobody going there because the federal money didn't arrive. And the reason why it took off was because it was dirt cheap. It was zoned for industry, there was nothing going on, and it was round the corner from a couple of the universities. So it happened for odd reasons. Now, but it's federal intervention in America that leads to some of these things. The changes to the Orphan Drugs Act in America is an industrial policy that kickstarts US biotech. I think we've learned the lesson in the UK, and we've had an industrial strategy. We've had many industrial strategies in life sciences, but some of us, I think, have kept it going. And I hope you'll hear from Chi later, the Shadow Science Minister. What's interesting is what they're going to keep the same as on what's working if they get in, rather than ripping it all up and starting it again. We've had it ripped up and started and stopped and started a few times in the last few years. But fundamentally, investing in fundamental science, you know the full story about the Indian, no, who is it who comes to, it's either the Indian Prime Minister or Malaysian Prime Minister who comes to the UK, and they say, how do you get an innovation ecosystem? And they say, start a university and come back in 100 years' time, and then we tell you how to do it. So there's some elements around that. You know, we have got the competitive advantage of really fabulous academic institutions. We've got the ecosystem that's big companies, global companies, medium-sized companies, an investment community know what they're doing, and a global city. That gives us a sustainable competitive advantage, and that is underpinned by effective government policies, which organisations like the BIA try and keep them on the straight and narrow one. So I think that that is important. So the role of the government is important, but the government ain't going to do it. It's going to enable everybody else to do it, and that's why I say, can I ask, who started a company in the audience? How many people have started a company? Look at that, it's excellent. Who's thinking of starting a company? Very good. Who would never consider starting a company? One or two. Brave people, brave to put through it. No, I think, because I mean, that is the structure is there. I mean, we build the paths, the gravel, the watering system. You put the plants in and grow the garden.
Do you have anything to add to that, Stephen?
I think there's huge gaps, actually. I think, you know, as the panel has said, there's certainly gaps in funding. I think there's gaps in the way the economic industrial strategy lays out. Most of our innovation happens in the Golden Triangle, and yet we have amazing academic institutions everywhere. What's absolutely clear is if you can put the right facilities around an academic institution, you can get spin-outs, startups and scale-ups coming very quickly. So what we did here was we insisted on the building of high-quality lab space and affordable, flexible office space, which includes high-quality lab space. I was amazed when we twinned with Barcelona to see that was exactly their formula. So the question is, could we do that in Bradford? Could we do it in Stoke-on-Trent? Could we put something around Edinburgh University, Newcastle University? The race for scientific dominance for future is at such a pace that what the government has to do is up its game. And it's done some good things in recent years. But I think the idea that we say, what is the formula for creating an ecosystem and allowing us to play to huge British strengths in science, tech, engineering, maths, medicines, of which life sciences is probably the main one. How do we capture that and scale up what's going on here? So the gap is, let's government think like a scale-up entrepreneur. What do we need to do to scale up across the UK and give ourselves a third great industrial revolution?
Thank you. So, a slight change of tack with the next question, which is, how can we balance innovation with regulatory and ethical concerns? So, I don't know who wants to start us off in that framework.
Oh, that's a very broad, difficult question. I mean, I think already, you know, biotech specifically is one of the more regulated industries anyway, and there's a very good framework for it. But kind of going off the, you know, couple points made earlier, there are policies that can kickstart in a positive way the, you know, the industry, like what the FDA did with the Orphan Drug Act, and there are definitely positive things that we can do, I think, in biotech to just, let's say, adopt more new technologies. I know the NHS and NICE were kind of recently working on upping the budget for novel drugs as long as the older drugs get priced down to make way for it, right? So I think there's, you know, positive things that we can do in biotech to get new things in. But in terms of, let's say, regulating things that have maybe moved a bit too fast, I don't really have an answer for that. The recent hot topic is AI, and I don't think I'm qualified to give policy advice on how AI should be regulated. But I think what we should keep in mind is, you know, it's already here, which means inevitably it's going to make a difference. So how do we do that in a productive way without hamstringing the technological advancements, but, you know, also not creating things that harm people? And I think in a way biotech is already in a good spot because it had that regulatory framework already that's based on the concept of safety and efficacy, right? And if you kind of stick to those two concepts, safety, efficacy, then you already have like the guardrails.
I think that's very true within the medical framework, which I think is obviously has probably, you know, definitely has the tightest regulation, quite rightly so. Amongst, you know, the sort of broader biotech space of, you know, microbial engineering and plant engineering and so on, I think, you know, there's a much more dynamic and problematic kind of question around how we take regulation forward in that space and still bring people along on that journey as well. I don't know whether you have any kind of comments about how you, from an investor standpoint, how you view these kind of concerns when you're looking at companies.
I mean, I would say we take our cue from the regulatory authorities. So of course, you know, we would look at companies and encourage companies to have conversations very early on with the regulatory authorities and stay current, because you know, you may know what was needed when you launched the drug 10 years ago, and now it might not be the same. And again, everything is moving at a very fast pace. So I don't think I have anything new to add, other than, you know, just keep an eye on how things are moving forward. I think historically there's always been mistakes due to unknowns of new technologies, you know, and that's the reason why it's such a highly regulated industry. I mean, it's obviously necessary, and I think the only answer to that is really just having that expertise, you know, in these regulatory authorities. So at the FDA, at the MHRA, just having that expertise so that they can understand and lesser the unknown, basically, and that's the best you can do, I think.
Can I have a crack at this one? I mean, I think the UK is in a supremely good place to be at the forefront of regulating the horizon of new technologies, and that's because we put our religious leaders in our legislature. 3 countries in the world that have their religious leaders in their legislature: Iran, Vatican City, the UK. Why do I think having the bishops in the House of Lords is sensible for the innovation of regulation? It's because actually, if you look at when contentious ethical issues have arrived in our society, if you think here about some of the ones that we've done in the past, particularly around IVF, a generation or 2 ago, we wouldn't think of it as being in vitro fertilisation is not a contentious issue in the UK, but when it was cutting-edge science, that was an incredibly contentious societal concept. There was a House of Lords inquiry by a woman called Baroness Warnock, and there was guidelines around that. The Human Embryology and Fertilisation Authority was set up to provide a context in which that happened, and that meant that the UK remained a leader in that area. And we've seen the success of in vitro fertilisation to enable childless couples to successfully start families. So we have a heritage of managing this. If you look at one that perhaps went wrong on GM crops and GM food from a scientific perspective, we ended up with a policy position which was at some distance from perhaps what was scientifically or globally the norm, where we've got maize across large parts of the world grown through a genetic modification, and we ended up with a particularly technical definition of GMO through European law, which wasn't helpful, and we ended up not having the opportunity for some of the most modern types of crops that were resistant to drought for a generation, and stymied that industry in the UK whilst it flourished in Latin America and Asia and North America. We now have the opportunity to set our own GMO regulations, which I think are more based in science, and now we're reappraising the opportunity that some of those things have for the sustainability agenda as we face how do we provide yields and through deep biotech technologies for sustainability. So I think there's experience we've got there. Mitochondrial transfer will be another technical example of an IVF technique, again, where the UK, through Newcastle Science, has led a regulatory position which is there in the world. And of course, the US position on not allowing certain types of stem cell embryology research meant that the UK has taken a lead, continues to have a lead in that space. So actually, we're really well positioned when it comes to some of these things. I'm not sure that the AI Summit was fantastic last year, but at least it was an AI Summit and it was here, and Elon Musk came to the UK for that, rather than that being in California. The UK was relevant. I think it's because we can start to have these discussions, and I think it is because we are able to think about the pioneering technologies and then think about them in a regulated framework. I think these will be around data and AI and the opportunity that you can put together from some of that. There are going to be some big challenges around if it is predicted that you might get cancer, or there's a reasonably genetic certainty. What does that then mean for your treatment? We're going to have to think about those. At what point do you intervene? Those are not decisions that are purely scientific, nor are they. They're commercial. They'll be NHS wide. We're not a bad place where you can actually have that discussion with many of the players around. And some of the techniques that are developed by organisations like NICE through citizens' juries or things like that are a reasonable way of doing it. Otherwise, you can end up with, as we've seen recently in China, where scientists take a plunge, take the paper to the colloquium, and then see whether they're allowed to do it, and then the Communist Party tell them 6 months later that wasn't quite right, and they disappear off the face of the planet. So I think that the UK is in not a bad place to handle some of those things. I don't know what they are, but we're in a good place to do it.
I do think that's an important and useful perspective, and it's good to remember that some of these regulatory aspects, we've been living with the after effects of the GM regulations for an awful long time, despite the fact that this technology has been proven to be safe in the world. There has been no major ecological disaster arising from it. Yet still we are faced with very difficult, challenging regulatory environment around those areas. And I think also it's worth considering where the important frontiers are going to be in that coming forward. I think we're starting to work on looking at alternative foods and alternative food productions, and I think the whole regulatory space around that is very open, but it needs to be. I think you're right. Look at where we've done very well in terms of regulation. Like the IVF one is probably the best example of where that was good, and the combination of these opinions and scientific evidence is really key.
I love corn, and I don't know who eats corn. Anyone eat corn? There we go. Who knows where corn came from? ICI, developed in the UK, one of the most successful alternative proteins, developed in the 1970s out of UK technology. One of the ones that's world leading. Now, if we can do it in the 70s, we can definitely do it in the 2020s on lots of this stuff. But that was also about marketing, it's about branding, it's about bringing in those other collaborators that can make a difference. But it was tackling a big challenge.
Yeah.
Have we got any?
Okay, I've got one more question, so I just get your questions ready, because after this one we're going to be coming to the audience, right? So last question from me to the panel is, how do you pick investors and companies that are resilient? So I'm going to start with Duleek on this one for the company perspective.
So I think this is where a local ecosystem is very useful, because you will talk to other founders, and other founders are a big part of how you decide on investors. So you, of course, want an investor who's going to be resilient, as in sticking with you as the company goes up and down, which is natural, right? And as the markets go up and down. And there are a lot of pieces of information about individual investors that are not public, as in, investors are here, we're talking about investors investing in private companies, early stage, how they actually, carry out your interactions. You can't actually search that up. You don't have a Yelp for investors, right? And even if there were, it would all be positive anyway, so you wouldn't really get accurate information. But other founders will tell you your experience. Yeah. But other founders will tell you, oh, this is what this investor did in this situation, right? And if you talk to enough founders, you get the warm intros to the investors, and you also know which investors you might want to pick based on other people's experience with them.
So then from the other side of the fence, Leigh, maybe.
I agree. It's a small world. Even though it's not, it is. Everybody knows at least someone who knows them. And from my end of raising money in a company and then switching to the other side as the investor, I really understand when you have a really terrible investor that just doesn't understand the process or understand the field you're in, right? Are you a tech? Are you biotech? Do you understand the intersection? Do you not? Are you a generalist? Like, do you know how up and down this space is and how long sometimes it does take to generate enough data to have a product and whatnot? So I think you really need, there's a lot of resilience needed. But to that point, we live in such an amazing time right now. As someone who's most excited about advanced therapies coming out, I mean, right? We have the ability to take a cell out of your body, engineer it, put it back in, attack the disease, and have the tools and technologies to track that exact cell. And I think from an investor perspective, that comes with a lot of weight, right? We want that to not go wrong, and it will, unfortunately. Hopefully not. So I think it goes both sides, right? You need a founding team and scientists who will understand that the challenge is ahead, and also, be able to look a few steps forward, ask for advice at the right time, and kind of see some of the problems coming. So I think, not only do you have to be a good investor to work with your founders and management team, but also appreciate that, these are long journeys. It takes right now, let's say 8-10 years to develop a drug. Hopefully with AI, it'll be shortened, but it takes a long time. These are a lot of cycles. You're going to go up and down. So I think it really takes a very strong team from both sides to actually get to that success point.
Thank you. And Emilie?
Yeah, I think to Duleek's point, I think reputation is really important to us at Parkwalk, and I'm very glad that Parkwalk has been around for 13 years and still maintains a really good reputation. And as you say, it's a small world. It's not an easy feat. And I think as an ex-academic and ex-TTO person, when I joined, I was really, really glad that wherever you go, Parkwalk is seen by founders and by the academics and all the universities and all the TTOs as quite a good investor. And part of the reason for that is exactly because we invest in university spin-outs. We've been doing it for a number of years. We have a lot of experience in the difficulties that it takes to bring a disruptive technology to life. We understand that it takes a little bit longer. We understand that you may need to pivot a number of times. And that is something that actually has really resonates, I find, with the founders that we talk to, because often they're frustrated, especially I think maybe with US investors that come and want to see X million ARR and within a short number of years, and they just don't necessarily understand that deep tech or life sciences or it's just harder and takes longer. I think it's really important, and we believe that it's really important to stick by the companies that we fund and be in there for the long term. And I think in the last year, we've had to make really difficult decisions with companies that have had a lot of trouble fundraising. Last year was a really difficult time to be fundraising. A lot of companies weren't able to raise their Series A, for example, and we're looking for a bridge round and looking at investors to do that internal round. And and just yesterday I was talking to someone that told me how happy they were that Parkwalk stepped up and invested in the company, because it was their typical medtech company had to pivot a number of times with their product, was raising money at the wrong time, couldn't raise the amount that they needed, and on the other hand, really great preclinical data, really promising results, and we were able, thankfully, because we still had money to deploy, we were able to fund them on our own, and obviously it's quite ballsy to do that. And yesterday, someone on the board came up to me just to say how grateful they were for that, and so. It is really a relationship and a journey that you go, and we were able to do that because we've known the company for a long time. We were there right at the beginning. We've been working on them with them for years now. We've seen the journey that they come through, and we believe in them. So it's difficult, but it's a relationship that one has to build between the company and the investors.